I may have taken the meaning of built not bought a little too seriously. The only thing that's going to be original to this C10 is going to be the VIN number, literally. This plate is going to stay right there in hopes that I can get this truck on the road one day. If you're new here, I made a hand-built chassis from scratch with a Crown Vic front crossmember and a custom 4-link suspension. The body has all new dimensions and custom wheel arches to give it that signature look, and as if that wasn't enough, I somehow got the idea to make the entire body out of carbon fiber. Can I make this the lightest C10 in the world? So far, we're on the right track. I made a 3.9 pound tailgate that's strong enough to support me and a 2.8 pound headboard. So the next step is making the carbon fiber bedsides to get this box under 20 pounds total. No stone is going to be left unturned with this build, but someone's going to have to put in some serious work to get this thing done. I gotta get to it. To make my carbon fiber bedsides, I'm going to be using the resin infusion method, and that's going to get me one of the highest quality, lightest, and strongest parts possible. That's exactly what I want with all the work I'm going to put into these bedsides. I want to make sure they turn out okay. So if you check out on the table here, this is the material I'm going to be using. So I'm going to start with the obvious material. Of course, we need some carbon fiber fabric. Now these are both 2x2 twill weave carbon fiber fabric. This is the most common pattern of carbon fiber you're gonna see, especially in the automotive world. This one is 3K fabric and this one is 6K fabric. So this one is actually double the thickness of this one. This heavier fabric is gonna be used to build up the part and give it some strength. And then the lighter fabric is a lot easier to work with since it's thinner, so it goes into all the corners and creases better. So that's gonna give it a nice visual finish. And then for our epoxy resin, I have some infusion epoxy resin from Composite Envisions, and then our hardener with it as well. So this is a medium cure hardener. With this hardener, I have 120 minutes working time, and the gel time is actually 160 minutes. And moving over to this side of the table, I have my vacuum pump. We have a catch pot for the vacuum pump and a whole bunch of other small things that I'll show you as we go through the video. The first thing you need in order to make a carbon fiber part is actually a mold. And in my last video, I went through the entire process of making a 3-piece mold of my passenger side bedside. And since then, I've sanded the mold with 1000 grit sandpaper, applied some buffing compound, and brought it to a glossy finish. I then drilled some holes through the front and rear pieces to be able to bolt them down, but first I need to seal up the ends to be 100% leak free for when I apply some vacuum to it. Before I put my 2 end pieces back on the mold, I'm gonna put some silicone on the edge here, and when I bolt it down, that's gonna squeeze the silicone and hopefully seal it up very nicely. And I don't want the silicone to be stuck permanently, because I do have to take these end pieces back off when everything's gonna be all said and done. To take those end pieces off without having the silicone permanently stuck, I'm gonna put some PVA. This is a spray-on application, and that's gonna basically make a barrier between my part and the silicone, and it should peel right off with that stuff on it. This is actually my first time making a carbon fiber part with a multi-piece mold. So a little disclaimer for you guys, don't really copy exactly what I'm doing until you watch the entire video, because I don't know if it's gonna work out or not. We're gonna find out. I'm excited to try it out. So let's get to spraying that PVA. I swear, anytime you touch a wrench, you get a busted knuckle somehow. We are putting blood, sweat, and hopefully tears of joy at the end of this thing if it's successful. So here you have it. This is a 3-piece mold completely assembled. So now we're ready to move on to the next step. Or so I thought. Not so fast. The first step was supposed to be putting gum tape on the perimeter of the mold. And if you don't know what gum tape is, it's basically a double-sided tape that's going to be used to stick a vacuum bag on the mold later on in the video. The gum tape is not sticking to the silicone at all, so I'm gonna have to figure something out for those corners, because that is just gonna cause some leaks. So after removing all the silicone and PVA, I restarted and used seam sealer. And the seam sealer did bond to the gum tape, so problem solved, right? Well, stick around to the end of the video and you'll find out. So I have my gum tape stuck all the way around, and with the seam sealer, it sticks very nicely. With every mold I've made so far, I've always put the gum tape as the very first step. And the reason for that is simply because when I'm starting out, the mold is at its cleanest, basically. There's no little hairs or dust particles or anything on the mold. So it's a perfect time to apply the tape. And also there's no release agent on the mold as well. So if there's release agent under the tape, you could have your tape release prematurely, or you could even have a leak in your bag later on. And also it makes it so that it's completely ready to go when you have your fabric laid down, and you don't really have to mess with your fabric once you have it down, because you could kind of disturb your weave, or you could catch a piece of gum tape on your fabric, which could pull a layer off. So if you ever have a mold like this, put your gum tape first. It just makes life easier. Next up, I have to wipe on some mold sealer, followed by some release agent, 3 coats of each. Pretty simple stuff. So after 3 coats of mold sealer and 3 coats of the 700NC, you can see a bit of streaking, but it's not really a big deal. All right, so now things get very interesting. This is where we start to apply our carbon fiber fabric. You know, with this mold, it's not just as easy as laying down one solid piece of fabric and calling it a day. Here, I'm gonna have to have a seam on my fender flare right over here, and that's gonna allow the fabric to sit with the weave perfectly straight. If I were just to have one solid piece of fabric, the weave would kind of follow the shapes and you'd have whipping in it, I would say. To give you guys a quick little demonstration of how the weave can be straight or all crooked, you can kind of tell the pattern is going up to the right. And if you just take your fabric and stretch it a bit, you can see how it distorts the weave, and you can actually bend this quite a bit, and all of a sudden your weave is all over the place. So that's why I'm gonna put a seam, just to keep the fabric nice and straight and relaxed. And then that way, I think it's gonna look a lot more professionally made and uniform. And to get a perfect seam, you may have seen in the background, I started making a cardboard and tape template of the exact shape of my fender flare. So with this template, it should give me a super clean seam that looks professionally done. And what I'm gonna do is I'll transfer it over to my 3K 2x2 twill weave carbon fiber fabric. And this is just dry fabric. There's no stabilization. To eliminate the fraying when I'm cutting this fabric, I'm gonna use a little trick with this carbon fiber veil. I'll show that to you guys in a minute. And since the last time I made a carbon fiber part, I didn't really have a proper fabric cutting table, so I kind of invested in a few self-healing mats. This should help me out quite a bit to make nice, straight, clean cuts. So now that you're up to speed with the game plan, it's time to get down to business. By pulling out one single strand of fabric, it gets you a reference point. As you can see, I have a straight line in my fabric, and that tells you where your weave is. So if your line is very whippy, obviously you need to make adjustments. And right now, I think you're gonna be able to see that on camera, but the fabric sits pretty much exactly how I need it to sit. So I have this set up, ready to go. You can tell a lot of people that make carbon fiber parts, on camera it looks good, but if you'd actually see their parts in person, and sometimes you can even pick it up on camera, their weave just goes all over the place. And you know, it's still a carbon fiber part, props to them, but it takes away from the final part in my opinion. So I wanna make sure I get this perfectly straight. So with the weave sitting straight, now I have to make some cuts. And to make a cut without having all my fabric fraying, like I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna be using this carbon fiber veil. To use that carbon fiber veil, all I have to do is apply a bit of spray tack on my fabric, cut some strips of that veil, stick it on, and then that carbon fiber veil, super thin stuff, that's gonna hold all the strands together to basically keep everything lined up. So that's a little trick if you want to make some seams. If you just cut your fabric like this, it's gonna look like a 3-year-old cut it with some dull scissors. First layer is down. Look at that. That is gonna be insane. It already looks super cool. So far the weave looks, you know, very straight, which is a good sign. And I was able to get the seam pretty much perfectly on the edge of my flare. The only little concern, or not really a concern, but you won't be able to notice this much at all, but it is overlapping a slight bit right there on the seam. So, I mean, no one's ever gonna see that. Now the challenge is gonna be getting my carbon to sit in those corners. And I don't really care how it's gonna look on the inside here. That's gonna be, you know, tucked away behind the cab, so you're not gonna see that. So I'm just focusing on this main face, getting that nice, and then however it wants to sit behind, it doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna play with it a bit, see what I can do. Then on this side, it's gonna be the same deal. Second layer is down, and this is the 6K fabric. And honestly, this is a lot easier because you don't really have to worry about the looks, because this is just gonna be a middle layer. You're not gonna see it in the final part. So I did put a few slits just so that the fabric is relaxed. It just makes things a lot easier. And in the corners, I also cut out some sections and just kind of stuck it in there as well. And on this middle layer, I didn't really go too crazy about making sure the slack is all gone, because this is all gonna get squished down against the mold with the vacuum bag. It's only the first layer that you have to spend a lot of time making sure everything looks nice, because of course, that's the layer you're gonna see. So now I'm at the last layer, and this layer is not usually too crucial for most parts, but this is gonna be exposed. You're gonna see it. It's gonna be the inside of the box. So I'm gonna try to make it look as nice as I can. You know, it's not a smooth finish. You're gonna see with the peel ply, it makes kind of a textured finish. So you don't really have to have the fabric absolutely perfected. It's still gonna look presentable. I just wanna make it look as nice as I can since it is gonna be visible. So for the last and final layer, I have a nice spare piece right here that I'm gonna be using. Final layer. I just laid this one on loose so that I can work with the fabric once I have the vacuum bag. So now I have to apply my consumables. And the reason these are called consumables is because they're gonna get ripped off when the infusion is done and thrown out. So the reason for that is because this infusion mesh is just there to let the resin flow through the part when you're doing the infusion. And this infusion mesh would actually stick to the part probably permanently if you wouldn't have anything under it. That's why we have our peel ply. This is basically like parchment paper on a cooking sheet. It allows all the layers above it to get ripped off because this doesn't stick to the carbon fiber fabric. And this also allows a bit of flow through the part. So you can actually infuse parts with just peel ply, but it goes very slowly. So large parts like my rear bedsides, you need that mesh as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these two layers on, and then we're gonna bag this part. Alright, so I think I'm pretty much set for all the materials I need to put in this mold. And I did put a little bit of a resin break right over here because the wheel arch, obviously you have less distance for the resin to cross. So that should slow the resin down a slight bit so that it doesn't just all go in the pot. Now I have to start bagging this mold and also putting my resin feed and vacuum inlet. So let's get to it. Right here, I'm going around the mold, sticking the vacuum bag to the gum tape that I applied earlier in the video. There's also an important step here that needs to take place in order to do an infusion, and that is making pleats in the bag. The pleats allow for some extra slack in the bag so that it can conform to all the different shapes of the bedside. There's zero stretch in the bag, so if you have zero pleats, you're either going to rip it under vacuum or you'll have some big voids where resin will pool. So what I have going on for my feed inlets, I have one piece of tubing that's going to be in the resin once I start pulling a vacuum. That's going to a T-fitting, so it splits off to each side of my mold at the bottom here. And then that connects to a piece of spiral tubing inside the bag that goes all the way around the bottom, and it connects to the other side. So this is the spiral tubing that I'm talking about. It's just basically a tube with a slit going all the way around it. That allows either resin or vacuum out to evenly spread it across your part. So that's it for the feed inlet, the spiral tubing on the bottom, and then the two inlets going to a T-fitting that splits off, and it just goes into one single feed. And then for my vacuum, all I did was I just have a piece of spiral tubing, as you can see, going all the way across the top, and then it's just teed off to one single going to my catch pot. So that's a pretty simple setup up there. All right, so I got my vacuum pump hooked up to my catch pot and my catch pot hooked up to my mold. So we're pretty much ready to infuse. The bag, I'm gonna have to pull a vacuum and then kind of stuff it into all the corners and creases, get everything positioned exactly how I want it. And then, you know, after that, we're gonna put some resin in the feed inlet over here. So I just stopped the pump for a minute, and this is going to allow me to position everything while it's not under full vacuum, because once it's under full vacuum, everything's super tight. You can't really move it around. So we've sprung a leak, and what I've done is I've put some silicone all the way around the edge of the mold where the seam is, and also on every bolt, and also on the other underside as well. I was hoping to do the infusion today, but I'm gonna let this silicone cure overnight just to make sure that it doesn't get sucked into the part and then creates a new leak. With the power of editing, you guys aren't gonna wait any longer, but we're gonna fast forward to tomorrow and pull a vacuum on this thing. Well, moment of truth once again. We're gonna start the pump, turn this on. Valve is on. Now that we've pulled a slight vacuum, I shut the valve, and I'm just gonna position everything to make sure I don't have any voids. Our vacuum pressure is holding after the silicone, so I think our quick fix worked. Let's keep on going. All right, this is probably one of the most exciting parts of this process, but it's also one of the most nerve-wracking, because once we start infusing this thing, there's no turning back, and there's nothing I can do to fix, you know, any issues that come up. So hopefully this goes smoothly. I'm gonna mix up some resin, dump it in here, and then all I have to do is put my resin inlet in the resin, and then this is gonna infuse. It's gonna do all the work. I'm getting nervous. Let's go. All right, feed line is in the resin. Take the clamp off. It's go time. We are infusing. So everything so far looks great. The resin is getting pulled evenly, so it's kind of a relief, but we're not in the clear yet. So we do have a leak in the mold somewhere. You can see some air pockets. You can see the air. So not sure how this part is gonna look when it's finished. We'll have something anyway. Just a few more small spots to go. It's gonna be infused. So it's the day after the infusion, and this thing is done its 24-hour room temperature cure. Now we did run into a major issue while infusing this part. We sprung a leak and the bag did not hold any pressure on the part whatsoever. As you can see, the bag's loose pretty much everywhere. So that's a big no-no. You can't have that happen when you're doing an infusion. So I have no idea how this part's gonna look once I rip it out of this mold. Could be a complete disaster. Maybe it'll be somewhat okay. I'm pretty sure there's gonna be some blemishes. So now the only thing left to do is post-curing my carbon fiber part in my homemade oven that I built in a previous episode. Now I have to cure this at 180 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 hours, and then we're all done. We're gonna get to see what this part looks like. So let's get to it. We're so close. I opened the door a bit just to let the mold cool off, and we're now at 47, 45 degrees Celsius. I'm gonna let this cool off a bit more, then we're gonna peel this thing open, then we're gonna know exactly what we have. All right, so I've been waiting for this moment for what feels like forever, but it's only been, a couple days, but we're gonna open this up. And again, we lost complete vacuum, so it could be a total loss, but I'm still excited to see what it's gonna look like. So let's go ahead and peel this thing open. I'm gonna start by peeling off the bag and all the gum tape. I'm gonna go grab some safety glasses and some gloves because there's quite a few shards flying around. So we got all the peel ply off, bag, the mesh, and this is what we're left with. So you can see a few dry spots on this side. Have no idea if it's going to carry over to the other side, but we have to unbolt each end and we'll find out. Just have to cut this little bit of silicone and then this should, in theory, pop off. Just going to try to slide a little scraper through to release this thing. It's coming through. Try to squeeze it in here. Try to release it from this corner. There we go. All right, well, that's free. Interesting. Definitely have some dry spots. Definitely not the best down here, but we got something anyway. Let's keep going on the other side and then we'll see what the main surface looks like. So we got a bit of pooling over here as well. Some cleanup to do, of course, where the seam was. Same kind of deal as the other side. Definitely some dry spots. Let's get this main piece off now. Oh yeah. It's coming out. It's pretty easy release, I think. It's just stuck wherever I had the silicone. All right, there I think it popped. Yep. Let's go in the middle here. Whoa. So as a result of losing all vacuum right after an infusion, here are the defects. We've got some dry spots all over the place. Here's the first. This rear section is actually quite good considering, you know, the weave is all straight. Super dry on the top section of the rail. And our seam here didn't really stick together too well. And over here, it's even worse. And then we've got some more dry spots here. A few more over here. This bottom section is actually not too bad. A little bit of a dry spot there. We've got some bridging wherever we had sharp corners or edges. All basically as a result of losing vacuum, especially on the edge here. Again, the seam sealer didn't really do its job. So in the front and also at the rear taillight section here, the vacuum actually pulled in the seam sealer in the fabric. So kind of made a mess with that seam. So lesson learned, can't do that again. It is all stuff that I can take into account and make sure I don't do for my next mold. So it's a great learning experience and I can still use this panel 100%. So it's not really a total loss. The plan with this panel is probably going to be doing some sort of cool wrap with some areas that have exposed carbon, you know, exposed wherever it looks nice. So there's options. I'll have to come up with a cool design. And this could be like a race pack where I don't really care too much about, you know, dinging up my panels. And if I ever go on a track, you know, I won't be too scared to run them. So I have quite a bit of trimming to do. So I'm going to bring this outside. We're going to chop off all these edges and we'll see what this finished part looks like. And we'll probably slap it on the truck just to have an idea of what these finished carbon fiber parts are going to look like. Wow, what a huge process to flop a carbon fiber bedside. I mean, there's so much work involved into making one single carbon fiber part, but putting this on the truck, even though it did fail, it still looks absolutely wild and it does inspire me to keep going. I can't wait to see a flawless panel on here and also making the other side. After that, we're gonna have a complete carbon fiber box and it's really starting to set in. We're gonna have a full carbon fiber C10 here one day, and I can't wait for that day. Before I end the video, we gotta weigh this thing, and then from there, I should be able to calculate roughly how much the box is gonna weigh. As you guys can see, this thing is extremely light, and I've got my scale right over here. I'm gonna turn it on. So I'm just gonna balance the bedside from the top and we'll get a pretty accurate measurement here. 5.6 pounds for the bedside. Wow, that's impressive. 5.6 pounds for this bedside. That is absolutely insane. So with a 2.8 pound headboard, a 3.9 pound tailgate, and then our bedsides, the box is gonna be under 20 pounds total. Now that just doesn't really make sense. It's so light, I can't believe it. And bringing things back to our carbon fiber bedside, what do you guys think? How can I seal that mold so that we don't run into this issue again? What I'm thinking is maybe sandwiching some black surface coat in between those two pieces of the mold, letting that cure, and I'll just put some release agent or something to crack it open. Not really sure. I'm gonna do some research. Obviously, I did a lot of research prior to this, but there's a lot of things that tend to work and not work. And I found out that this method doesn't work. So, new method in the next video. I appreciate everyone for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next one.